The emperor who built one of the single greatest golden ages in all of Chinese history is the exact same man who personally, unknowingly handed his empire to the very general who very nearly destroyed it completely decades later. He didn't lose his kingdom to a foreign invasion, a sudden natural disaster, or even a rival claimant quietly scheming for his own throne behind closed palace doors. He lost it, in very large part, because of how deeply and completely he loved one particular woman at his own court. His name was Emperor Xuanzong of the Tang Dynasty, and this is the true, remarkable story of how China's most celebrated golden age and its single most catastrophic rebellion were both, in the end, caused entirely by the very same ruler. To understand how a single case of personal devotion could possibly undo 44 years of otherwise genuinely impressive rule, you first have to understand exactly how good those earlier decades of governance actually were for the empire. Xuanzong took the Tang throne in the year 712, following a turbulent period of palace intrigue, shifting alliances, and multiple rapid successions, and his early reign, known to history as the Kaiyuan era, is still widely considered today by historians to be one of the true golden ages of all Chinese civilization. He pushed through sweeping reforms of a bloated, inefficient imperial bureaucracy, restricted the corrupt practice of simply buying government offices outright, and successfully restored the state's finances after years of gradual, accumulated mismanagement under several earlier, less capable rulers before him. Under his generous, enthusiastic patronage, poetry, music, and the visual arts all flourished on a scale rarely matched anywhere else in Chinese history, producing towering literary figures like Li Bai, Wang Wei, and Du Fu, names still celebrated and studied by scholars today. Xuanzong himself personally founded imperial music academies and became known across the entire vast empire by an admiring popular nickname, Minghuang, which translates roughly to the Brilliant Emperor, a title he genuinely seemed to have rightfully earned at that point. By almost any reasonable historical measure available to us today, the first 3 decades of Xuanzong's remarkably long reign represent one of the most successful, genuinely well-governed periods any Chinese dynasty ever managed to produce for its people. And then, gradually and quietly at first, almost imperceptibly to those around him, something in the emperor's own personal priorities began to shift, in ways that would eventually unravel almost everything those first 3 decades had so carefully built. In his later years, well past the peak of the Kaiyuan Golden Age he himself had built, Xuanzong became utterly, completely infatuated with a woman named Yang Guifei, a consort who would eventually go on to hold the highest official rank available to any woman at the entire imperial court. Remarkably, and rather scandalously even by the relatively permissive standards of the Tang court itself, Yang Guifei had reportedly first been married to one of Xuanzong's own sons for several years before being formally brought directly into the emperor's own personal household instead. Whatever the precise emotional nature of their relationship truly was, later immortalized in famous poetry written decades afterward by poets who never actually met either of them personally, its practical political effect on the wider empire was immediate, measurable, and ultimately quite devastating for millions of ordinary people. As Xuanzong grew steadily more devoted to Yang Guifei and increasingly withdrew from the exhausting day-to-day burden of actually running his own vast empire, he began delegating enormous, largely unsupervised power to his chancellors instead of managing it personally himself. Chief among them was Li Linfu, a cunning, deeply manipulative court operator who dominated Tang politics for nearly 2 full decades through sheer intrigue, patience, and calculation rather than any real administrative competence of his own. After Li Linfu's eventual death from old age, that same enormous concentration of unchecked power passed directly to Yang Guozhong, who happened to be none other than Yang Guifei's own first cousin by blood. Yang Guozhong owed his sudden, dramatic rise almost entirely to his family connection to the emperor's favorite consort, rather than to any actually demonstrated administrative skill of his own, and it showed almost immediately in how badly he ended up governing the empire's finances, provinces, and military appointments. Meanwhile, a military governor of mixed Sogdian and Turkic background named An Lushan had been carefully, deliberately cultivating favor with both Yang Guifei and the emperor himself for years beforehand, patiently building the exact trust he would later ruthlessly exploit. By some surviving contemporary accounts, Yang Guifei even formally treated the much older An Lushan as her own adopted son, in an unusual court ritual that only further deepened his growing access to imperial favor and trust over time. That growing favor eventually translated directly into real, genuinely dangerous military power. Xuanzong personally granted An Lushan command of 3 entire frontier garrisons all at once: Pinglu, Fanyang, and Hedong, together covering vast, strategically vital stretches of the empire's exposed northern border. No single general in living memory had ever before been trusted with that much simultaneous military authority, concentrated entirely in one ambitious man's hands, answerable in practice to almost no one else back at court. The same emotional devotion that had elevated an unqualified cousin all the way to the chancellorship had also, almost accidentally, armed a deeply ambitious outsider from the frontier with one of the largest, most battle-hardened standing armies anywhere in the entire empire. Tensions between Yang Guozhong and An Lushan grew steadily and increasingly openly at court over time, each ambitious man constantly maneuvering against the other for the emperor's continued trust, attention, and favor above the other. Xuanzong, still largely disengaged from the practical machinery of daily governance by this point in his long life, appears to have done remarkably little to meaningfully address either the rampant corruption at court or the obvious, steadily growing military danger building right around him. In the year 755, An Lushan finally acted decisively on his long-held ambitions. He launched an open rebellion against the Tang court, officially framing it publicly as a campaign meant to remove the corrupt Yang Guozhong from power. His well-trained, battle-hardened armies moved with shocking, almost unstoppable speed across the countryside, quickly capturing the secondary capital of Luoyang before turning directly toward the true imperial capital itself, Chang'an. Chang'an fell soon afterward, its grand palaces and busy markets suddenly abandoned in a panic. Emperor Xuanzong, along with Yang Guifei, Yang Guozhong, and a large, chaotic fleeing entourage, was forced to abandon the capital entirely and flee toward the distant, uncertain safety of Chengdu. The very same court structure that decades of quiet personal devotion had carefully, unknowingly built around the emperor was now the direct cause of his own desperate, humiliating flight from the very same capital he had proudly ruled for over 40 long years. During that grueling, dust-covered journey away from the capital, the imperial party stopped to rest at a small way station called Mawei, exhausted, hungry, and increasingly furious at the men they squarely blamed for the entire unfolding catastrophe. At Mawei, Xuanzong's own imperial guards mutinied outright against their exhausted, frightened emperor. They killed Yang Guozhong on the spot without hesitation, then turned their anger directly toward the emperor himself, demanding one final, truly unthinkable price. They insisted that Yang Guifei herself be put to death as well, blaming her entire extended family for single-handedly bringing the once mighty empire to the very brink of total collapse. Xuanzong, by every surviving contemporary account genuinely and deeply devastated, ultimately gave the order anyway. Yang Guifei was strangled at Mawei in the year 756 at the emperor's own reluctant, grief-stricken command. The one single relationship that had quietly reshaped the entire structure of his empire over so many long years had just been ended, violently and permanently, by the very same soldiers who were sworn to protect him and his family. Shortly after the traumatic events at Mawei, Xuanzong's own son and designated heir, who had separated from his father's fleeing group entirely by this point, proclaimed himself the new emperor at a remote location called Lingwu. That son took the imperial name Emperor Suzong, and Xuanzong, still alive but now thoroughly sidelined and completely powerless, had effectively and permanently lost his throne without ever once being formally defeated in open battle by anyone himself. Xuanzong eventually returned to a battered, badly damaged Chang'an much later in his life, but only as a powerless, retired emperor, a hollow, purely ceremonial title entirely stripped of any genuine remaining authority over the empire he once proudly ruled. He lived out his final years in that diminished, largely isolated state until his eventual, quiet death in the year 762, a quiet, almost anticlimactic ending for the very same man who had once personally built one of history's great golden ages from nothing at all. The long, grinding rebellion that bore An Lushan's name, however, did not end there at all. It continued grinding on for years afterward, all the way until 763, long after Xuanzong's own political relevance had already quietly ended. The human cost of the long rebellion was almost genuinely incomprehensible at that staggering scale of loss. Census records suggest China's registered population fell from roughly 53 million people in 754 to only around 17 million people just 1 decade later. Historians still debate exactly how much of that staggering drop reflects actual deaths versus mass displacement, fleeing refugees, and simple administrative record-keeping collapse across the many provinces. But by any reasonable measure, the devastation was genuinely catastrophic for the entire empire. The Tang Dynasty technically survived the rebellion and continued ruling, in a considerably weakened and fragmented form, for another century and a half afterward, but it never again recovered the centralized strength and genuine stability of Xuanzong's earlier Kaiyuan years. So what does the strange, genuinely two-sided legacy of Emperor Xuanzong, the very same man who patiently built a golden age and then quietly, unintentionally dismantled it himself, actually leave behind for us today? A leader's personal devotion, when it quietly reshapes exactly who holds real power around them, can slowly convert decades of carefully, patiently accumulated strength into sudden, catastrophic vulnerability, often without anyone at court noticing at all until it's already far too late to reverse course. Xuanzong spent roughly 30 careful, deliberate years building one of the most celebrated golden ages in all of Chinese history, and it took less than one final decade of misplaced devotion and quiet neglect to hand nearly all of it away for good. In the end, the very same heart that patiently, carefully built an entire golden age also quietly signed its eventual death warrant, one small appointment and one small distraction at a time.